This video is sponsored by Car Vertical. Now you're probably wondering why I haven't pitched M3 Touring against the B9 RS4. That would be the obvious comparison. They're very similar in price and they're very similar in size. The problem is, love or hate it, the M3 Touring has moved the game on a long way compared to the current RS4. Dynamically, it's in a completely different league, and that does extend to the RS4 competition. Although it's a brilliant improvement over the standard car, it's too little too late as far as I'm concerned. And here in the UK, well, the RS4 competition doesn't come with those gorgeous carbon bucket seats, and they're not even available. So once again, just means it can't compete with the M3 Touring. The only reason, in my opinion, that you'd buy a new RS4 at the moment is because it has less controversial looks. And that's why I decided to pitch this mighty RS6 Avant against the M3 Touring. You see, one of these, with a few options on it, it's going to be £90,000 to £95,000. And although this RS6, when brand new, was about 115 grand, now at 18 to 24 months old, you can pick up a nice C8 RS6 for the same money of a new M3 Touring. And I think that makes for an interesting comparison, because although the M3 Touring is dynamically brilliant, as we've already talked about, this has a lot of qualities that doesn't have. For those of you that don't know, well, this gorgeous ultra blue RS6 Avant is my long-termer from Audi UK. I've had this car for 3 months and it goes back in about a week's time. I'm really going to miss it. I think it is undoubtedly one of the best looking cars on the road. The M3 Touring, well, it's mine. I picked it up about a week ago. It's practically brand new, and this is essentially its first drive. I'm really excited to see what it feels like compared to this, which I'm far more familiar with because I've lived in it for the past 3 or so months. Before we look at some of the stats and figures on both cars, let's just have a quick talk about the styling, because I think that's one area where even me as a BMW fanboy would have to admit that Audi take the win. The RS6 has always been a great looking car, and I think the very latest C8, proportionate wise, is just spot on. It's such a good looking car, makes me smile every time I walk up to it, and I'll be talking more about that when I do my end of term test on this car. The current M3, well, we know it has the grille, and in fact we've already had a couple of conversations with people today about which one they prefer, and they all go for the Audi because of the grille on the M3. And although, as you know, it doesn't offend me, it definitely divides opinions. But I think the rest of the car looks fantastic, and around the back end, well, there's nothing between them. Big thanks to Car Vertical for sponsoring this video. Here in the UK, we are spoilt for choice when it comes to the used car market. Whether you're buying something like this £90,000+ RS6 or a £5,000 Fiat Panda. And that's where Car Vertical comes in. With a VIN number or a registration number, they'll send you a comprehensive report on the car or cars that you're looking at. Firstly, is the advertised mileage correct? Does it tally up to what Car Vertical have got with their online records? Has the car been stolen? Or does it have any outstanding finance? The last thing you want to do is buy something like this if it still belongs to a finance company. It might have also been involved in an accident, and if it has, there's a good chance that Car Vertical have got some pictures of it, just like the RS6 that I'm showing you on the screen now. So don't gamble with your next used purchase. Make sure you hit up Car Vertical using the link below in the description, and at the checkout, type in Achilles to get 10% off. Thanks again to Car Vertical. Under the M3's bonnet, we have the S58, which is a 3-litre inline-6 twin turbo. Produces 510 horsepower, 650 newton meters of torque, and that all goes through a ZF 8-speed automatic gearbox, which is the only option, and BMW's M xDrive system. They claim this car will do the 0 to 62 sprint in just 3.6 seconds, which is just insane. But as we know, so many modern cars are just so fast these days. It weighs 1,865 kilos, and it has a claimed combined MPG of 27.2. And under the Audi's bonnet, we have a 4-litre V8 twin turbo. Produces 600 horsepower, so that's 90 more than the BMW, and 800 Newton meters of torque. That's 150 Newton meters more than the BMW. It also runs through a ZF 8-speed automatic gearbox, which is the only option, and Audi's Quattro all-wheel drive system. They claim this car will do the 0-62 sprint in 3.6 seconds, which is identical to the M3 Touring, and we will be testing it out shortly. It weighs in at 2,075 kilos, which I guess you'd kind of expect because it's definitely a bigger car. It's from a bigger segment. That makes it about 200 kilos heavier than the M3 Touring, and it has a claimed combined MPG of 22. So not looking great, although in reality I've found that to be much better, especially on long runs. Now we're around the back of the cars, I think it's definitely the M3's favourite angle, and once again the RS6 looks fantastic. We'll talk about the dimensions. So the M3 Touring is 4.8 metres long and 1.9 metres wide. And it runs on, out of the box anyway, staggered wheels. So we've got 19-inch on the front axle and 20-inch on the rear axle. They look tiny next to the Audi's wheels, which we'll get onto shortly. In terms of interior or cabin space, well, let's jump in and find out. Driver's seat is in my position. I drove this car down here this morning. So, as you'd expect, that's set perfectly for me. What's the back seat going to be like? Let's have a look. So door opening, it's not too bad. We've got the carbon seats in here, remember, and I think that the carbon seats save a bit of interior space, or they give you a bit more interior space because the seat itself takes up so little space. It's not too bad back here. If I take my bobble hat off, I've got plenty of headroom. I've just about got enough legroom. Remember, that's my driving position and my seat in the front there. Certainly wouldn't want to do a long journey with 3 people on the rear bench. It's a car that's designed for 4 large adults as opposed to 5, but there is a centre seat back here for those emergency journeys. Getting in and out isn't too bad. In fact, it's probably easier to get in and out of the back than it is of the front because I've got the optional carbon buckets. I'm going to put my hat on because it is cold out here. Now, let's look at the boot. Got my camera gear in this one. It's actually pretty big in there. We've got 500 litres with the seats folded up and 1,510 litres with the seats folded down. That's exactly the same as a regular 3 Series Touring, so it being an M car doesn't sacrifice any of the boot space. It also has some underfloor storage for your valuables, first aid kit, towing eye, etc. Parcel shelf, and there's a net that goes up there, I guess for your dog if you have one in the back, or if you're carrying really heavy stuff in the boot to stop it flying forward into the cabin. With the RS6, well, it's almost exactly 5 metres long, which is 20 centimetres longer than the M3. It's also 5 centimetres wider, and it definitely feels at least that when you're on the road, but we'll talk about that once we get behind the wheel. It has optional 22-inch wheels on this car, square setup, so front and rear, which look absolutely massive in comparison to the BMWs, and we know they're 19 and 20, so they're not small, but compared to these, there's just night and day. But as I say, these are optional. I think they come standard on this particular RS6, which is a carbon black edition, but on the base RS6, you get 21-inch wheels, so still very big and arguably better for the UK, because I'm sure the 21-inch wheels with the bigger tyre sidewalls are going to give you a slightly better ride quality. Let's jump inside and see what it's like. Once again, the driving position is set for me. Once that annoying chime stops, which is a very common sound for Audi users, I'm sure. feels very comfortable in here. I am sitting higher, but getting in and out is so much easier because this doesn't have carbon bucket seats. Very nice place to be. And getting in and out, well, the doors are definitely a little bit bigger as well, so that makes it easier. Jumping in the back, once again, doors are slightly bigger, getting in noticeably easier, a little bit more legroom, even though these seats definitely take up a lot more cabin space than the carbon buckets. A load more headroom. These seats are very comfortable. Let's check out the boot. Got the key here, double click on this one. It looks bigger, it is bigger. Surprise, surprise. 565, so 65 litres bigger with the seats folded up. It's a much nicer, squarer space as well. They've really squared off everything, so you can maximise the size of whatever it is you're trying to get in the boot, whereas the BMW is a bit more itsy bitsy, if that makes sense. And once you get rid of both the parcel shelves, just like with the BMW parcel shelf, we've got a net in there, and you fold those seats down, well, you're left with a massive 1,685 litres, which is nearly 200 litres more than the BMW, and I can see that visually. I can see that it's definitely at least that, and I've been using this car to move house recently, and the amount of things that it's swallowed up is unreal. So this, if you're after practicality, I mean, there's no doubting and denying that the RS6 is the one to go for. A quick talk about the interiors and the driving position. Well, the BMW, surprise, surprise, has the better driving position. This particular car does have the optional carbon buckets, but even with the regular M Sport seats, you're sitting lower and everything just feels better to me ergonomically. When you're sitting here relaxed on a motorway, your elbows are resting on both of these and it just feels great. It's really natural feeling to me. In terms of the interior, well, BMW have just recently updated it with this curved display, and love or hate its touchscreen functionalities. For instance, they've taken away the climate controls, which are now all inside here, which does frustrate me a little bit. The graphics, etc., are amazing, and it looks fantastic in here. We've also got a brilliant M head-up display. In fact, that is the best head-up display on sale today. I've never experienced a better one in any other car. And this also runs BMW's iDrive 8. I love the fact that you still have an iDrive controller down here, along with all of the touchscreen functionalities up here. Steering wheel is lovely, carbon paddles at the back of it, the leather's nice. It is a bit thick, the rim. I wish it was a little bit thinner. We also have the M1 and M2 preset buttons on the wheel. But otherwise in here, it does feel modern, and there's a fair amount of light in here because my particular car has the Silverstone with black leather, which I think is a really nice addition to this car, because although, yeah, your black leather interior is classy and very hard wearing if you're using it as a family car, I think this just elevates the interior, makes it feel a bit more expensive in here, and definitely adds a bit of light, which is a good thing at this time of year. Jumping in the RS6, the driving position is not as good as the M3. I am sitting a little bit higher, but it's not bad. I still have plenty of headroom up here, and I'm still looking pretty much to the center of the windscreen. These seats, which are standard fit, are very comfortable and reasonably supportive. I'd say they're on par with the M Sport seats that come standard in the M3 Touring, except in the Audi and this particular press car, you can get them ventilated as well as heated, which is pretty cool. All of this layout is very stylish. When the car's off, everything's black, and when you fire it up, everything comes to life. The graphics and stuff do feel like they're a step behind the curved display in the M3, and that would make sense because this is now 4 or 5 years old, whereas the curved display's only been around for sort of 12 to 18 months. The wheel arguably is nicer actually. The rim itself is thinner, and this one's actually heated as well, so there's a heating element in there, but the rim they've still managed to make thinner. It's covered in Alcantara, which is really, really nice. And it doesn't have M buttons, but it does have the RS button, and there's two presets in there. So you've got RS1 and RS2, essentially the same as M buttons nowadays. So you can preset them in these menus, and that's pretty cool because it means you can have better throttle response and more sound, but keep the air suspension in its comfort setting for a UK road. But something you can get on your RS6 and not on your M3 Touring is a panoramic glass sunroof. This particular press car unfortunately doesn't have one, but I'm sure for some buyers that might be a must-have option, especially if you're carrying around rear seat passengers or your kids regularly, because it just gives you the impression and feeling that you've got more space. And it's also a bit of a happier place to sit back there when you've got light coming in. And it's a pity that this particular press car doesn't have that roof, but at least you can find a used example that does have one, whereas on the M3 Touring you're never going to get one because BMW will not fit it to that particular car. First things first, let's test out the RS6's claimed acceleration figures. I'm not going to do the same in my M3 Touring because it's a week old and has literally done a couple of 100 miles. But thankfully I was up here in that M3 Touring press car a couple of weeks ago on the same piece of tarmac in pretty much identical conditions. So let's cut to that clip and see what I managed. My Racebox Mini is ready to go. Left foot is hard down on the brake, right foot on the accelerator, preparing launch control active, here we go. A short shift, and there we go. 3.19 seconds. As I'm sure you agree, that was massively impressive. 3.19 seconds is the time to beat. I've got all the traction control systems switched off. My left foot is hard down on the brake. My Racebox Mini is ready to go. Right foot on the accelerator. Here we go, launch control program activated. Oh, a little bit slow off the line, but wow, once it gets going. 3.28 seconds. I'm only going to do it the once because I only did it the once in that press car and it was a pretty good launch. But like with so many RS6s that I've tried to launch, it's just that initial 3, 4, 5 feet off the line where it's a bit hesitant, doesn't get going quick enough. That's where the M3 is really strong. But once it gets above 10, 15 miles an hour, this thing just punches, and that's less than 1/10 of a second between both cars. So you could almost call it a tie, but the M3 Touring just takes the win to 60 miles an hour. This brilliant RS6 will be going back to the Audi UK press team in the next couple of weeks, and I will be doing a unique and individual video on it, talking about the 3 months that I've had it and all of the positives that I've found in that time and some of the negatives. But for today's video, we're just going to be talking about its positives compared to the M3 Touring, and then when I jump in the M3, I'll be talking about what that car has that this car doesn't necessarily have. The first real standout quality that this C8 RS6 has is ride quality. This particular car has the air suspension fitted, and the way it flows down your favorite A or B road is just incredible and unmatched from anything this side of an A8 to 7 Series or an S-Class, especially when you bear in mind that it has those giant 22-inch wheels and fairly low profile tyres on it. Ride quality is just so good, and that's something I'm going to miss massively when this goes back, and it's something that the M3 Touring definitely can't match. The next one is the low down grunt that 4-litre V8 twin turbo produces. We're in 4th gear now at 30 miles an hour, 1500 RPM. I put my foot down and it picks up so quickly. There's a tiny pause there, maybe a second, just waiting for those turbos to spool up. But when they do, this thing just fires itself down the road, all 2+ tons of it. It's unreal, it's addictive, and again, it makes the S58 in the M3 feel massively underpowered or under-torqued, which it is when it's below sort of 2,500 RPM, but this feels amazing. That V8 has got so much low down grunt. We know it has much more torque on paper, but it's delivered a lot further down the rev range, which means when you're using this car as your daily car, or you're using it in normal circumstances and you're not constantly up in the rev range, it's just easy to live with. It just does everything. It's always got torque and always got power available. And while we're on that subject, well, I might have teased you with it a little bit then, it's sound. This V8 sounds so much better than the straight six that's in the M3 Touring on the inside, and definitely on the outside. Just listen to this. It's a battleship, it really is. It sounds so good. This is a 2023 car. It's cluttered up with OPF filters, etc. But it sounds so good. Put our windows down when we come up here. Just listen to this. Listen. It's just so addictive and such a nice sound. It's not overbearing, and when you knock it out of dynamic and you quieten the exhaust, well, it does get very quiet in here. In fact, you can hardly hear that V8, but when you put it in the right modes, oh wow, yeah, much better sound than you get out of the M3. Next thing to talk about is the four-wheel steering in this car. Although it's 20 centimeters longer than the M3, it actually feels like it's shorter because the rear wheels turn as well. They turn in an opposite direction to the front wheels at slower speeds to help you with parking or maneuvering around town, and they turn the same direction as the front axle at higher speeds. And both of those just make this car feel far more nimble, and it will have a much smaller turning circle compared to the M3, which seems insane, but it's true because we tested it earlier on, and it's a really nice feature to have on such a big car, especially if you live in a town or a city. Another positive with the RS6 is when you knock it out of your RS1 or RS2 mode and back into auto or comfort, put the gearbox back into drive, it just becomes such an easy car to live with. It's not constantly saying, I've got 600 horsepower, drive me hard, which cars like the M3 are. Thankfully, the G series cars are a lot better at that than the older F series cars. They always wanted to go fast. They were never happy cruising around, and yeah, that was never a good thing if you had that car as your one and only car. But the RS6 has that amazing sort of Jekyll and Hyde capability. In drive, everything knocked back, ride quality we talked about is amazing. You can hardly hear that V8, just cruises along. It's such a lovely, relaxing place to sit. You'd almost think you're in an EV, and I mean that in a positive way, in the sense that it's just so relaxing in here. There's nothing much going on. You can hear more tyre roll because the V8's not producing much sound, and I think that's definitely a big positive that the RS6 has that the M3 doesn't. And the highlights for the M3 Touring, well, the first thing we have to talk about is its handling and its driving dynamics. You quickly forget you're in a near 2-ton estate car the first time you tip it into a corner like this and you accelerate out of it. It's unbelievable. The front end on these G80, G82, G81 M cars is unreal. If you haven't experienced it yet, it's just mind-blowing. I've not driven anything else, and that does include supercars, cars like even the brilliant 992 GT3 that have a better front end than the G series M cars. honestly, wherever they've done that front axle and the rear axle is mind-blowing, and all of that translates into this very latest touring as well. I took that press car out on a track day and it was just doing things that it shouldn't have been doing, including lap times. Unreal. And that's a big standout for the M3 Touring over the RS6. You do feel like you're more connected to the chassis of the car. You can feel a lot more through the seat, especially if you've got the optional carbon bucket seats, than you can in the RS6. But I guess you're going to kind of expect that, and that's the flip side. You feel more connected and involved with this car, but the ride quality, etc., does suffer a bit, and it's definitely not as smooth and fluid as the fantastic RS6. The next positive to talk about is how much smaller this feels on the road. We know it's 20 centimeters shorter and 5 centimeters narrower, but it feels a lot smaller than the RS6. And I know I said the RS6 feels compact because of its four-wheel steer, but when you're driving along the road like this, you just feel like you're taking up a lot less of the road in this car, which you are, than in the RS6. You're always quite aware of just how big that car is, whereas this one, although it's not the smallest car on the road, it definitely seems to fly down your favourite A or B road a lot easier than the RS6 does. It takes up less of the lane, if you like. This car also has more performance enhancing technology, things like BMW's brilliant M xDrive system, where I can play around with the amount of power and torque going to the rear axle. In fact, at the push of a button, I can decouple the front axle altogether and turn this into an old school BMW M car where all of that power and torque goes to the rear axle. You can't do that with Audi's Quattro system. And although most of the time you'll find yourself in the default four-wheel drive or four-wheel drive sport, it's definitely a nice feature to have that you can play around with. And that goes for a lot of the other modes. We've got engine modes and chassis modes, steering modes. We even have brake modes in this car. And talking of brakes, well, although on paper they shouldn't really be any more powerful than the ones in the RS6, when you use them for the first time, especially when you cranked up into sport, remember this is on steel brakes, not the optional 8,000 pound carbon ceramics. When you hit them, again, it slows down so well. And a lot of that is relating to that brilliant front axle we talked about earlier on. When you combine the two, the stopping power of a G80, G81 is just unreal. And that's definitely a plus point over the RS6. I mentioned earlier on, BMW don't offer a panoramic roof option on the M3 Touring. They also don't offer a tow bar option. That's because of where the quad exhaust is located. So once again, that's going to be a deciding factor for someone who's looking at one of these cars, because if you want a tow bar, well, you simply can't have the M3 Touring. There is no clear winner in this comparison. Obviously, I've gone down the M3 Touring route because for me, top of my list is driving dynamics, and there's no denying that this is ultimately more of a driver's car than the RS6, but the RS6 ticks so many other boxes. If you're after something that's really practical, really comfortable, makes a fantastic sound, then the RS6 is the car you need to go for. Also, if you need a tow bar, if you want a pan roof, etc., there's a lot of other things that are going to sway you towards that car. What we have uncovered in this test is whichever car you go with is going to be a brilliant piece of kit. You're not going to be disappointed. I'm going to miss the RS6 when it goes back in just over a week's time so much. I've had so much fun with that car. I've really loved and enjoyed every single minute of it. The M3 Touring, it's very new to me. I had that press car for a week and really enjoyed my time with it. And this car, well, I've had it for a couple of days and I've only done a couple of 100 miles in it, so I'm only just getting to know it. But obviously I've lived with the saloon for the past couple of years and I know what a brilliant piece of kit it is, but it definitely ticks alternative boxes that the RS6 ticks. So very interesting comparison, two very different cars and two very interesting buying options as far as I'm concerned. Do you go buy an M3 Touring new because that's essentially your only option at the moment because they are so new, or do you go out and buy yourself a lightly used RS6? If you go down the RS6 route, or if you're buying anything used, remember to use my Achilles code at the checkout with Car Vertical. There'll be a link in the description below. Thanks again to those guys for sponsoring this video. It takes a lot of work and effort to do a twin test, and a big thanks to my good friend Andy for helping me out as he has done in the past so many times. I hope you enjoyed this video. Until the next one, I'll see you then. Cheers.